Today's gospel reading from Matthew, Peter believes that he is being especially generous when he asks Jesus the following: "Lord, if another member of the church sins against me, how often should I forgive? As many as 7 times? Surely Peter thought that forgiving 7 times is beyond what is required. But rather than praising Peter for his generosity in doling out forgiveness, Jesus said to him, "Not 7 times, but I tell you, 77 times." In biblical terminology, 77 times means always. Jesus picks a number, 77, which well exceeds Peter's 7 times. He does this to impress upon Peter that forgiveness is limitless. Now, there isn't even a little bit of wiggle room on this. Biblical scholars and theologians are in clear agreement. Jesus' use of 77 times means followers of Jesus are to offer unconditional and infinite forgiveness. To our ears, probably even to Peter's ears, this may seem impossible. It certainly is difficult. But Jesus is nothing if not consistent in telling his disciples that following him is not easy. In fact, discipleship can be costly. Nonetheless, Jesus is equally clear that out of that difficulty, out of what discipleship may cost us, there is freedom. A freedom that can only come through the unconditional love and grace of God. An unconditional love and grace given in Jesus. So when we forgive, we are free. We are free from anger, resentment, and pain. And when we are free from anger, resentment, and pain, we can be reconciled to God and to others. Reconciliation being our primary task as followers of Jesus. It's the very mission of the church, as our catechism teaches, to restore all people to unity with God and each other in Christ. Forgiveness is a required action in order for there to be reconciliation. In fact, studies show that there are social, psychological, and even physiological benefits to forgiveness. There are definitely spiritual benefits. And I find this extremely interesting that some of these various studies show these benefits, because it would seem to suggest that we're hardwired for forgiveness. It's in our DNA as human beings, a human family created in the image of a loving God. Now, none of this is to suggest that forgiveness is necessarily a quick or easy task. It often is a process. And sometimes the process is lengthy and reflects more of a journey. But Jesus sets the pattern of forgiveness for his followers and invites us to forgive so we may be healed, set free, and at peace. And Jesus goes on to tell Peter a parable about the forgiveness of debt. And as Jesus tells this parable, as he does in all of his parables, it's told within the context of first century Palestine. A time and a place and a culture, a society very different and distant from our own. So it's particularly important in this parable for us to understand the patronage system, which was at the heart of most economic dealings in Jesus' day. I want you to picture a pyramid, because there were numerous levels of patronage and various money managers who handled the flow of vast amounts of money through this pyramid system. They were responsible for passing along payments owed to the patron above them and securing payment from the servants below them. In many ways, it was the original pyramid scheme. Servants of patrons handled the transfer of debt, while adding as much onto the payments as they could get away with for themselves. There are biblical scholars who suggest that the slave shown mercy by the king in Jesus' parable this morning may in fact have been a top-level manager, with the king being the patron at the very top of this pyramid. The slave likely took more off the top than he should have, owing a debt of a large sum of money then to the king. His only recourse is to beg for mercy. And he's successful at begging for mercy, the king showing mercy and forgiving the debt of that slave. But it wasn't only the forgiveness of personal debt. The king, in forgiving the debt of this top-level slave, would have also effectively been forgiving the debt of all of those throughout the rest of the pyramid, canceling the debt owed through that slave, a form of universal forgiveness. So what does the slave do after being shown extreme mercy and forgiveness? Rather than honoring the forgiveness, the slave, when he encounters another slave who owes him money, demands immediate payment. In so doing, he goes back to the business as usual within the context of the patronage pyramid, back to the way that debt was handled before the king's forgiveness. Now, the problem in this parable is not with the king exerting his final justice, but with the limits the slave placed on the king's forgiveness. It makes all the difference how we understand this parable in our relationship to forgiving others, to being forgiven, and in our relationship with God. Or in this parable, Jesus it reveals how we can be held captive by our own inability to forgive, and to either a lesser or a greater degree. This keeps us holding on to anger, pain, and resentment. No matter how justified we may feel in those feelings, and those can be very real and justifiable feelings, they leave us broken in some way. But Jesus invites us to be healed and made whole. And our being healed and made whole as human beings created in the image of God is our way forward. It's our way forward toward true reconciliation, and forgiveness being but the necessary first step. In fact, Jesus placed such an important emphasis on forgiveness. He placed such an important emphasis on forgiveness because our existence as human beings depends on it. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, in speaking about South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, said that forgiveness and reconciliation was the only way forward for South Africans. Without it, he said, the rage and quest for revenge would have been their sure destruction. In a recent book titled The Book of Forgiving, co-authored with his daughter Mpho, Episcopal priest and a seminary classmate of mine, Archbishop Tutu wrote, "The quality of human life on our planet is nothing more than the sum total of our daily interactions with one another." The quality of life on our planet is nothing more than the sum total of our daily interactions with one another. Each time we help, each time we harm, we have a dramatic impact on our world. Forgiveness is important on both a personal and community level. And as Archbishop Tutu and Mpho write, in our own ways, we are all broken. Out of that brokenness, we hurt others. Forgiveness is a journey we take toward healing the broken parts. Each of us, at different times in our lives, find ourselves needing to forgive or to be forgiven. Sometimes we're in need of both at the same time. While we cannot control how or when others forgive, what we know is that Jesus' invitation for us to forgive is an invitation to find healing and peace within ourselves. In the book of forgiveness, Tutu's right, they offer some helpful observations for us. The first is that forgiveness does not mean we don't get to be angry or to feel pain. But forgiveness calls us to eventually move beyond our anger and pain. It's the only way we can set ourselves free. Next, they say that forgiveness is not a subversion of justice. Perpetrators going to jail or otherwise being held accountable does not take away the opportunity for forgiveness. Forgiveness is different from justice. Implied in this is that forgiveness doesn't even depend on justice, because forgiveness is freedom from that which keeps us from recognizing and realizing the healing and peace within ourselves and in our lives. And thirdly, forgiveness does not mean forgetting. We don't need to deny the wrong done and the pain caused. See, even after his resurrection, Jesus still had the wounds of crucifixion, but he had forgiven. And lastly, they point out, and perhaps this is the hardest, if we're truly being honest with ourselves, is accepting, as Archbishop Tutu suggests, that there is nothing that cannot be forgiven, and there is no one undeserving of forgiveness. He reminds us that the Bible is full of cruel, even monstrous acts where the perpetrators are redeemed. The criminal on the cross next to Jesus, one of Jesus' own, Judas, betraying him into the hands of his persecutors. Paul, a leading persecutor of Christians before his own conversion, becoming one of the most prominent apostles of the early church. In South Africa, the Truth and Reconciliation process led to forgiveness for apartheid and those who committed unspeakable acts of atrocity during the apartheid regime. Tutu recounts that they could condemn the ghastly, even monstrous acts, but somehow refrain from labeling the perpetrators themselves as monsters, to somehow see them still as children of God who held within them the possibility of redemption. And again, none of this is to say that the path to forgiveness is an easy one. And some of the paths we take toward forgiveness will be longer and wind around bend more than others. And just as no two wrongs in need of our forgiveness are alike, neither are the paths we take to get there. No matter what needs our forgiveness or the time that it takes to forgive, what we can trust in is that Jesus is there inviting us and encouraging us forward. Even when we think that we have exhausted our ability, even our desire to forgive, Jesus wants us to remember the unconditional forgiveness that we have received. Nothing, absolutely nothing, can separate us from the love of God in Christ. And Jesus wants us to know. Jesus wants us to know perhaps more than anything. He wants us to know the freedom that we gain from resentment and freedom from anger and freedom from pain, which holds us captive, which prevents us from living in peace. For in forgiving we find freedom. Those whom we forgive no longer have power over us. And in forgiving we reflect the grace of God in Christ. Now we, like Peter, sometimes feel there is a limit to our forgiveness. But each time we forgive, we bear witness to the light of Christ where there was once darkness. Each time we forgive, we bring healing where there was once pain. Each time we forgive, we bring peace where there was once discord. My friends, forgiveness is our way forward. And Jesus desires it for us more than anything. And as Archbishop Tutu has written, forgiveness is nothing less than the way we heal the world. Amen.